eyes, 14 eyes, all of that is a real big problem. We've never really had free speech. It's always been carefully manicured and managed to look like you can say what you want, but like Noam Chomsky said, you have a very narrow window in which you're allowed to have a public opinion. And as long as you stay inside that window, you can say whatever you want. Of course, that's not free speech. It's just acceptable speech.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 218. And for the fourth time, Ed Hoefer is coming onto the forum. He's the first person to come onto the show 4 times. So he's definitely a guy who talks about a lot of different things. We're going to talk about current events and hopefully some other things going on in the election world. And we'll just see where this goes, because Ed has a lot of knowledge on a lot of different things, possibly artificial intelligence. And so we'll just see where this goes. So how are you, Ed?
I am fantastic. It's good to see you again, Chris.
Yes, it is, Ed. What do you think is going to happen in 2 months when the presidential election right now?
Oh, I am really excited for the election. As an active non-participant, I think we're going to see some of the best changes in the next administration, no matter who wins. I'm not certain who's going to win. I think both candidates have a really good shot at winning this time. And no matter what happens, we're going to see some good stuff coming out on the other end.
So what kind of good stuff do you think could happen, Ed? This is a very optimistic take from my libertarian friends, usually, who are probably tend to be more pessimistic than they should be.
Well, both candidates are highly controversial, which means come January 20th, trust in government is going to go lower. And from a perspective of somebody who's a libertarian or a small government person or an anarchist, all of those people should be happy about the general public having a lower trust in government. I see 2025 as being the lowest trust in government year, not just for the United States, but for the whole world. And I can't think of anything that would be better for the long-term health, wealth, and stability of the world than people being skeptical about their leaders.
I can see where you're coming from, but I've also noticed that really doesn't play out well, at least in reality. A lot of places in Mexico, Latin America, they don't really trust them at all either, but that doesn't really make the situation better.
Latin America is not the United States. They have a very different culture. In fact, every country in Latin America has its own unique culture. Many of the countries are united by language, and the dialects they have are very different. They use different slang, they have different ways of operating. The United States and Western Europe have a homegrown culture of human rights and individual liberty. South America does not have that. Central America doesn't have that. Mexico doesn't even really have that. So when you have a country with a strong history of individual liberty, human rights, and basically what we were talking about, the libertarian values, when you have a country that has a foundation in those values, when they don't trust their government, you tend to see an improvement in the condition of the people and human rights. And I think we're going to see that in the United States, the United Kingdom, and to a lesser extent, Western Europe, although Western Europe is going to take a lot longer to catch up with the UK and the US.
That should be very interesting. The catching up with the UK and the US, but what do you think that's going to look like in reality, Ed, though? I mean, if people, what government programs will die? Will be less likely to have war? I mean, what do you think is going to happen with that?
I think war will be much less likely. I think the conflicts in both Israel and Ukraine are likely to de-escalate over the next year and get quieter. Now, they could get hotter in the short term, and I could be wrong about the 1 year projection. I think the mid range, 3 to 5 year range for Ukraine and Russia and Israel and the region surrounding Israel, I think it's going to get quieter in those areas. Specifically, the biggest thing is censorship and free speech. People want to be able to speak. Yes, everybody's happy to censor the people they don't like, but in practice, when it's you being censored, you tend to push back on that. And I'm seeing the next 3 to 5 years being a renaissance for free speech in Western Europe, the UK, the United States, Canada, and even Mexico. Mexico, I think, is flying under the radar right now as far as liberty oriented ideas are concerned, because they have a really big neighbor that tends to suck up the spotlight. I think Mexico's got a bright future as far as human rights and free speech and liberty are concerned. And the primary way that we're going to see it in the United States is going to be economic. Regardless of who wins, we're seeing massive reshoring and massive investments into our industrial base and our intelligence. Artificial intelligence is shooting up in a very big way. So I expect every aspect of the US economy to zoom over the next 4 to 8 years, regardless of who wins. If Harris wins, it'll go in one direction. If Trump wins, it'll go in a more unpredictable direction.
You know, one thing I worry about is that if we, I think no matter who wins, I think they will definitely escalate the situation in the Middle East. I think they'll get us more involved. They'll do more to bend over backward for Israel, which is what they've always done. And I think it'll become less popular with the public because I don't think the public wants to have this war. So yeah, I definitely think the war will. You know, I don't know about other things with Ukraine or Russia, but what do you think about, foreign policy?
Foreign policy from a government level, I don't pay a lot of attention to that because I expect politicians to be focused more on improving their own personal standing than in actually getting something useful accomplished. So foreign policy to me is it is an area where I just don't put a lot of attention. It's not something I can influence, and it's not an area where I think serious solutions are going to come from. And conversely, we're not going to see a whole lot of horrible mistakes come out of foreign policy. I mean, you could see that foreign policy worldwide is generally a giant mess. So it's just going to be situation normal with foreign policy, regardless of who wins. And the real changes that we're going to see are going to be driven by grassroots groups, typically businesses and individuals wanting to do their own thing.
Possibly so. I mean, I do think that, there's, and I remember that talk with Mike Benz and Tucker Carlson where Mike said, foreign policy actually drives domestic policy now. And you get a situation where the CIA, and now in some cases, foreign policy is basically advocating for censorship. The CIA will want to tell England to censor somebody, and England will come tell the U.S. to censor somebody. So, or sometimes they'll do the censoring for them, since they can't.
5 eyes, 14 eyes, all of that is a real big problem. We've never really had free speech. It's always been carefully manicured and managed to look like you can say what you want, but like Noam Chomsky said, you have a very narrow window in which you're allowed to have a public opinion. And as long as you stay inside that window, you can say whatever you want. Of course, that's not free speech. It's just acceptable speech. Have you heard of the parallel society or the parallel polis?
I think you've talked about that before.
I may have mentioned it before. It's the movement that destroyed the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, nobody in the West wanted to talk about the tools that were used to destroy it. because the parallel police, what they did was they basically disengaged from government. They were under a totalitarian regime and they knew they couldn't fight back. So they actively suppressed violence against the Soviet regime and they encouraged people to simply do their own thing. Literally knitting circles and folk dancing clubs and starting new bands, making little movies, whatever they wanted to do that wasn't pro or against the government, they did. So as long as the government didn't come to crack down on them, it's like, oh, what are you doing over here? Oh, we just have this little drum circle and we're singing songs that our people have sung for 4 centuries. Well, the Soviets don't have a problem with that. So it took about 20 years from the beginning of the parallel society until the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And in Eastern Europe, everybody knows how the wall fell, why the wall fell. In the West, nobody knows. Nobody knows at all. And I think that's because the intelligence communities saw the parallel society as a threat. The parallel society is still active, it's still growing. What we're doing right now is very close to the parallel society. You don't actually have to be officially a member. The internet is 100% in line with the activities of the parallel society. And that's where I think the primary changes are going to come from. It's going to be from people just ignoring government and going about their own lives and developing their own interests.
Well, I really, really in a lot of respects, a parallel polis could really be everything that's done with cryptocurrency.
Oh, 100%. If you do anything with cryptocurrency, as long as you're not actively funding something that the government really hates, that is parallel society, 100%. The Venn diagram is a circle. there's total overlap between the two.
Yeah, we definitely have more of those movements, like freedom cells and other things, and people just doing things on their own. I definitely think, the glorious unschooling movement is becoming a part of that as well.
Homeschooling is more popular now than it's ever been, and nothing is more of a threat to centralized authoritarianism than homeschooling, because the main source of indoctrination from centralized authoritarian powers is the public school system.
And that's why they've always utilized it. It's always amazed me that other people have been, have thought it could ever be anything else. And I think as much as I was scratching my head at alleged libertarians who were supporting coronavirus policies, I scratch my head even more at libertarians who come out and say, oh, it's so terrible that the schools are shut down. And there were a few libertarians who were saying all that due to these policies. And I just said, well, just let it go, because we actually have this is actually, a one good side effect of all this. But yeah.
Well, there were a lot of bad things that happened. Okay, so the people who died and whose health was impacted by COVID, whether from the virus itself or from the consequences of not being able to access adequate health care, those were all very tragic. On the other side of things, a lot of great things have happened. People do not trust the authorities or the official narrative nearly as much now as they did before 2020. And that's a huge bonus. Having the schools shut down for 2 years was very disruptive, and it let people see what the world would be like without the public schools. And everything went on, everything continued. It's actually fine. So, yes, people who are scared, they're going to lament the closure of the schools. They're going to lament people not following the policies because they're scared. If you think you're going to die, you're willing to accept all sorts of infringements on your rights in order for safety and protection. I personally don't agree with those perspectives. I am sympathetic to the people who feel that way. They're scared.
Yeah, I mean, I think the weird thing is just the people who thought all this was okay. It's kind of scary to think about who goes on with it. But, you always have this unique ability to zoom out. And when you zoom out, you almost always can spin everything in a positive way, which I like having you on here because I need more of that. But,
it's a positive side effect of having a difficult and disjointed childhood. I went to more schools than I had grades in school. So the zoomed out view is kind of what I grew up with, because I was constantly bouncing from one school to another. I was always an outsider. It was always a different state.
Something I've realized, and I think one thing that gives me maybe a different attitude toward voting in general. You mentioned that you don't vote, but I never see an election as one independent thing. I see the elections as, it's not just a question, of what's going to happen now, but it's also a question of, what kind of country do I want to live in? Where is this politician going to take us in the next 10 years? And I really don't think a lot of Americans look at voting that way. They
Well,
just
you're right.
they
You're
look
right.
at the now.
Most people look at voting upside down and backwards. They put the most effort into the elections where they have the least influence. Your vote for president matters much less than your vote for your local town school board. Well, I don't even know. You don't vote for the school board, I don't think. But for your local elections is where you can have the most impact. You can talk to the candidates. You can have a real meaningful conversation with them. And if you're really motivated, you can sway an election by yourself on the local level. On the national level, you're just screaming into a hurricane. No one's going to hear you, nothing. And most people are more concerned about the short term. I'm more concerned about the long term. The reason I don't vote is because I know the one thing politicians are more afraid of than anything else. They're more afraid of this than death. When someone's more afraid of something than dying, you know it's a big deal. And the thing they hate more than death is being ignored. When you vote, when you operate inside the system, it is a signal to the people running the system that the people are willing to work inside the system. When you take your vote away and say, I am not going to vote, you are telling the politicians you're ignoring them and you're not going to participate in their system. And I think that that is scarier to the government than somebody voting for a different party. I was first exposed to this idea in the 80s when Ronald Reagan went on late night television and he said, well, yeah, there's some people vote Republican and some people vote Democrat, but we can all agree the people that don't vote are the real problem. And that didn't sit well with me as a child, and it really doesn't sit well with me now. So when politicians say, yeah, my opponent, I don't like them, but what I really don't like are the people who don't vote, suddenly it's like, oh, I know what I need to be then.
I don't remember that, but I know what you're saying. I definitely, certainly, I think Donald Trump wants to be the center of attention more than anything. I think he just likes being on stage and hearing people talk to him. He even, I mean, he would certainly rather be booed than be ignored.
He gets energy from his supporters and he gets even more energy from his detractors. So if you want to take energy away from a politician, stop giving them energy, positive or negative.
I don't know if I've ever suggested this to you before, but I've certainly suggested to other people. If you ever watched Rocky and Bullwinkle, there was the story of the Pottsylvania Creeper, and Rocky finally said, "We've tried everything except putting that thing to bed." And then the plant suddenly dies because everybody starts being nice to it. And I think that might be the one thing that would really end Trump's political career if the media would just start being nice to him. It's the one thing they haven't done, because it seems like they've done everything else.
That would probably be effective. I lived in Minnesota for a year and a half when I was a kid, and I loved Rocky and Bullwinkle. I liked them before I moved to Minnesota, and once I was in Minnesota, I felt like they were family, and they felt like family ever since.
So exactly what I'm talking about. What are some other political lessons that you learned from our the Moosehead Squirrel? That's that. I don't think anybody really remembers it, but that show was so brilliant in so many ways.
Well, everybody thinks they're Rocky, but really they're all Bullwinkle. Everybody in politics is Bullwinkle, or at best, at worst, they're Boris and Natasha.
Yes.
That's the big takeaway from Rocky and Bullwinkle. Everybody thinks they're the do-gooding squirrel, they're Kermit the Frog, they're Mickey Mouse, and in reality, answers are difficult. Problems are complicated. Anytime you come up with a simple solution, you're either a well-meaning doofus like Bullwinkle, or you're actively subversive and malicious like Boris and Natasha.
Yeah, Boris and Natasha, I think, are, yeah, and
I did like the meme when Trump got elected, where somebody made a meme about a fictitious press conference with Melania Trump, and they said, "What is your goal for the next 4 years?" And she says, "We must get Moose and Swirl," because she actually comes from the, I believe she comes from the country where Boris and Natasha were coming from. Or it's a fictitious country, but if you triangulate it on a map, it's right next to Austria. I forget which one, but it was kind of funny. And she does look a lot like Natasha. Classic femme fatale look.
yeah, Boris, and I always thought it was funny too because Natasha is so much taller than Boris. It's just like, yeah, he's the bad guy, but you really don't see him as that threatening because he's so short. I think it's you just
And he's incompetent.
yeah,
Natasha is more competent than Boris. And I think she just loves the little guy. And so she just goes along with whatever he wants to do because she loves him and she loves her country. And she doesn't really see him as being capable of doing too much trouble.
but she's always asking him the question. They're like, Boris, what when they're looking for the Mount Flatness, says, Boris, what do you think happened to Mountain? He said, well, maybe somebody stole it. It's like stealing a mountain. It's just,
Oh, you're bringing back the memories. I love that show. And I
yeah,
especially loved Boris and Natasha. Whenever they were doing something, that was the best. It reminded me a lot of Mad Magazine and the spy versus spy stuff.
yeah. They never implied that Boris and Natasha had anything. They were just collaborators. That there was anything else going on between them, but I don't know that ever really. And you had a few other cast of characters. You had Captain Peter Peach Fuzz and the Moon Men, and but they weren't always there. But it was definitely bringing in some interesting characters. I don't know if they were what they were. Uh, it was so unfortunate when Jay Ward and family ended up selling all his estate to, and then Disney was using it in commercials. I said Jay Ward never would have approved of this. No way.
Well, that's the nature of things. You become a creator, you're on the avant garde, and then the next thing you know, you're selling Cheetos, whether you want to or not.
I remember the one skit, where the where they were. I think they were in a submarine or a boat, and they painted a big letter T on it. And the British plane was about ready to attack them, but then they saw T. It says, "Oh, it's 4 o'clock. We got to stop the attack and have our tea." It's like suddenly they remembered it was time for tea, and of course you can't talk about Rocky and Bullwinkle without talking about some of their other various cast of characters, Peabody and Sherman.
Oh, I love Peabody and Sherman. The movie was such a tragedy.
I never saw the movie just because I just didn't see how it could possibly work. It just
I saw a trailer, and that's as far as I could get. I was just, nope, I can't
okay.
watch this.
Well, I won't judge it based on a trailer. I just wondered, I might have to go. And I never saw any of the Rocky and Bullwinkle movies either. I just didn't see how it could possibly. But you
Yeah,
never, but
me
you never
neither.
know. Really, I might give it a shot if you. But going back to the originals, it's just always so funny. It's
There's something very
Aesop.
special about the low budget nature of it that just made it. You just didn't have any fear. You're like, hey, let's try this, and if it doesn't work, that's okay. We'll try something else next week. And you can get some really good creativity when you're not afraid of failure.
Oh yes, you can. And they did some other things, too, like Aesop and Son and
Oh, I forgot about that. Oh, yes, fractured fairy tales. Oh,
Fractured Fairy
wow,
Tales. Yeah, Edward.
all the little skits that they did on Rocky and Bullwinkle. You're really bringing back the good memories.
Yeah, and of course, who narrates Rocky and Bullwinkle? Who else? William Conrad. Oh, perfect. Yeah, he was great for that. Yeah, and it just all worked out. I mean, what other things did you learn from that though? I thought it had some great lessons just in the way it's satire and politics and everything else. It just
Well, the overriding message was, I think, their own philosophy about their own work. It's like,
yeah,
we really don't know what we're doing, so don't trust us too much, but hey, come try your ideas too. I think that was the big overriding message for Rocky and Bullwinkle. Whenever somebody stands up and says, hey, follow me, I know the way, their response was, do you really? Do you really? You're not really doing that great on your own. Why do you think you can give me advice about how to lead my life? I don't know how to lead your life. I don't know how to lead mine. I don't know how to lead yours. So I have no right to tell you what to do in your life. And I'm willing to listen to advice. I'm not interested in being told what to do. That's one thing that I do know more than just about anything else. I want
yeah,
advice. I do not want to be told what to do. And I think that's a major message from Rocky and Bullwinkle.
yeah. You had it was funny. You had this Saturday morning cartoon that adults started to watch secretly just because it was something. And really, as a little kid, I didn't. It took me a while before I got up. Then I realized, oh, this is really funny. It's yeah. Anyway, we don't want to necessarily go down that rabbit hole. What do you think about uh so what do you think about any of the third parties in the presidential race right now? Do you think they'll make any difference, or do you care? Or
I think they have made a difference. I'm not too concerned about any of it. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to politics or the third parties. I mean, you can't avoid it. I don't try to avoid it specifically. I think Jill Stein and RFK Jr. did really big things. Now, Jill Stein's kind of a fixture. She's always running for president every 4 years. RFK Jr. was quite different, and there were some interesting things about him. He really gave me a very Ross Perot kind of vibe, where he stepped in and he shook up a bit of the status quo. He didn't do as much as Ross Perot did. He didn't cause as much havoc as Ross Perot. He did put out this air of honesty and an, a real desire to get to the root of some problems. Now, I didn't pay enough attention, so I can't give you specifics about it. But I liked the idea that he did that. And as politically disengaged as I am happy to see people who want to be politically engaged and then strike out in a new direction and say, hey, let's relook at how we're doing this. Let's change some of our fundamentals. And I like that about people like RFK Jr. and Jill Stein and the Libertarians and the other groups. There are lots of little groups out there. They just don't get much attention or purchase in a big two-party system like ours.
yeah, it really, yeah. I mean, I don't know. You got any opinions on Chase Oliver right now?
I know practically nothing about him. The little bits that I saw is like, hey, he sounds better than the two primary candidates. That would be great. I would like to see him get some purchase. I've just noticed that ever since Ron Paul left the stage, the Libertarian Party hasn't been able to get organized and focused on anything. Uh, they do a pretty good job at promoting liberty, but when it comes to running a campaign, I don't know that I've seen anything as effective as Ron Paul since that. It's just kind of gone downhill since then.
I don't. You mean Ron Paul in '88 or?
Well, the Ron Paul revolution in the 2000s.
Well, you
That
mean,
whole
yeah,
thing.
but of course that was, of course, I don't know if you necessarily can compare that because that was a campaign that was run within, within a major party. So that's a completely different thing. And
That is true. I tend to
yeah,
conflate those
what,
two.
Ed, I got to ask, how is it a revolution?
I was not a part of it, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
I think it was just spitballing. I would say it's probably a revolution in thought about breaking out of the mindsets that got us into the mess that we're in. I liked. I would compare it to Einstein's idea that you can't win the next war fighting with the weapons of the last war. I don't know if that was Einstein or not. It might have been somebody else. I do know that Einstein had a lot of really good opinions about
Yeah,
war.
yeah,
Oh
but
no. The thing was you can't fix a problem with the same tools that created the problem. It
you
was
can't
something
fix a
like that.
problem with the same thinking that created the problem. Yeah, I just wondered because I
Yes,
because
yes.
Ron Paul really didn't have any impact on the overall big picture. I mean, it's
Not in the short term. I think he changed how people were thinking, though. I think he had a lot of impact on the people who listened to him and took him seriously, and that's where the important things happen. It's to
true.
me, it's not about winning an election or how many Congress people your party has. I think it's about changing people's minds and getting them to think about things from a different point of view.
Well. For example, do you think he's? I mean, yeah, but I mean, yeah. When you change I mean, yeah, anybody can do that with an insignificant minority of people. But it's
Is there such a thing as an insignificant minority of people in an election? Sure, but elections are artificial constructs. They don't really reflect the world accurately. If you convince one person to change how they think, and then that person becomes a Martin Luther King Jr. or an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos or a Bill Gates, all of these people were controversial. Nobody can call them an insignificant minority. They were one person. And how many people did Ron Paul influence for the better? How many of them did he influence to change their lives and have this downstream ripple effect? It's impossible to measure those things.
so. What are what are some of the results of the ripple effect now? I mean, as the deficit gotten lower, have wars stopped? I mean, what kind of what can you tell me about this ripple effect that's happened?
I would say that cryptocurrency is probably part of the ripple effect. Ron Paul was absolutely pushing in the direction of things like cryptocurrency. How would Bitcoin have fared had Ron Paul not pushed his agenda for his entire political life? We can't say pro or con because it's an unknowable. The answer is unknowable. You'd have to talk to
Yeah.
everybody involved and see how that impacted. But the initial push with Bitcoin in 2009 was against bailouts, was against easy money, was against money printing, and that's where the deficit comes from. The
Yes.
cryptocurrency revolution was all about attacking the deficit, and we're in the middle of that fight right now. And cryptocurrency could destroy the Federal Reserve and the
Yeah.
US dollar. And if it does, then say goodbye to the deficit.
Well, Charles Hoskinson has admitted that Ron Paul's an influence, and of course, he created Cardano. What would you say, though? For example, about Javier Milei?
Ron Paul probably had a huge impact on that guy.
Uh,
And
I don't. Yeah, if he had, I know Milei has never mentioned his name, and he certainly mentioned plenty of people that I do know. He's mentioned economists, but
yes, he's a big fan of Hayek, if I remember correctly. He's an Austrian school economist. And if you were to ask him about Ron Paul, he might talk about him. Millet, though, is everything he says is strategic and calculated. He
yeah,
is attempting to make a positive impact. And for that reason, I suspect he wouldn't mention people like Ron Paul. For one thing, nobody in Argentina knows about Ron Paul. And his primary
yeah.
focus has been on energizing the Argentinian people to accept and pursue liberty. So it's again, it's impossible to say what kind of a ripple effect impact Ron Paul had on Milei, because you would have to talk to Milei about it. You would have to talk to all of Milei's supporters. You would have to. It's
Yeah,
it's functionally next to
I
impossible to trace.
well, and Ron Paul only speaks English, and Milei only speaks Spanish. I know he's mentioned Israel Kirzner. He's named his dogs after Rothbard. He's definitely been influenced by a lot of economists, and I know what books he's read, but I have uh, no evidence whatsoever in all the talks I've had with Milei that he even knows who Ron Paul is, which
My understanding is that Milei is the figurehead and his sister is the brains of the operation. So a more accurate question would be, what is her exposure to Ron Paul?
yeah, anyway, so
Yeah, it's an unknowable answer. It's a question you can ask and we can talk about it, and it can be fun to talk about. We can't actually find an answer.
yeah, so from there, it's we've certainly had a very interesting. What do you think is going to happen with AI? You said you're using it a lot for your own purposes. Where do you think AI is going?
Well, I tend to have a lot in common with people who are overly optimistic about the short term. Like when I think about the changes that could happen really fast, it's like, oh yeah, this could happen in 2 years. And then it takes 10 or 20 or 30 years for it to happen. I think AI is going to take a larger and larger share of our workload away from us. Functionally, I'm going to act as if it's always going to be a supplement, because I don't know what the world will be like if we have AI robots doing all of our work for us. That's what some of the most optimistic proponents say. AI is going to be smarter than us, and we'll have 10 robots for every human, and we just won't have to work anymore. I don't know what that kind of a world would look like. I don't know if I want to live in that kind of a world. I like working. I like being productive. And I feel like if I were in a world where my work didn't matter, I don't know how I would feel about that. So for the short and midterm, I am thinking AI is going to accelerate our productivity. It's going to be an assistant that's going to be there to say, oh, you missed this over here. And it'll take care of the non-creative work so that we can focus more on the creativity and the intuitive side of things.
I'm curious to know what kind of where exactly this might apply. If you could get it to do things for you that more
Well, on a,
repetitive tasks, but I think, tasks that are less repetitive, I think will be more of an issue.
on a simple level, spell check and grammar checks on my work are extremely useful. The fact that I don't have to use an editor or myself or even a dictionary to make sure that I spelled everything right and that my sentences are grammatically correct, that's a huge bonus right there. And as AI tools get more useful, we're going to see AI examining the overall theme of a story, where you can say, okay, here's my text. What will people think when they read it? And AI is giving people guesses on that now. And that's going to be enormously useful for writers.
Spell check in itself often makes a whole lot of mistakes. I mean, I've noticed on my phone a lot of times, if I write a plural word, it will often want to change it to an apostrophe s. I tried to write John Adams, and it wanted to change it to Adam apostrophe s. I mean, I'm just like, no, that's not what I'm wanting. It's so it definitely, and it creates just as much of a hassle, because sometimes it says, well, I'm smarter than you, and you're not going to be able to do what you want to do. It said, well, yes, I am. I've noticed.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's not perfect, and it's a question of, will it ever be better than people? when it
And
comes
does it ever,
to
and does
the
it
way.
actually save you time in that case? And I would say no. I mean,
Well,
I'm still very undecided about, I'm still kind of very on the fence about Google Maps. Although, where Google Maps does help me is at least Google Maps will help me avoid a traffic jam sometimes.
yes, it saves me a lot of time. I do a fair amount of driving,
Yeah.
and I've gotten into the habit of always putting in my route, even when I know exactly where I'm going, because it knows about traffic conditions better than the news radio. So it saves me time. It's
But
issues like that that are
sometimes
going to be good. And
I
self-driving cars are almost here.
self-driving cars scare the bejesus out of me. There are too many random things that can happen that self-driving cars won't know what to do with.
Yeah, it is a scary thing. If it works, then it's going to reduce traffic accidents and traffic fatalities by a large amount. If it doesn't work, then there'll be a couple of high publicity failures, and then we'll just go back to driving our own cars. I think it's going to work. I think it's going to work, and I think it.
I think the best example was a guy who was on a sidewalk operating the leaf blower and was blowing leaves out into the street, and the self-driving car stopped because it hadn't been programmed to know what that was.
Uh,
I definitely can see, the things I've noticed that people who really push this stuff, they tend to be extremely cynical about what we are capable of doing. And I didn't think, I never thought about this until recently, but when you drive a car in 1 minute, how many decisions do you make, and how many? Sometimes there are even subconscious decisions, but when you drive a car, 95% of the decisions that you make are the right ones.
mm-hmm, probably more.
And everybody just talks about, oh, well, you always have a wreck and stuff like that. Yeah, those are wrong decisions, but you only think about the wrong decisions because they often have really extremely negative consequences. But look at all the right decisions you make, but there's seems to be this dogma that that self-driving cars will eliminate some of the wrong decisions that are made. But how do you know it's not going to make wrong decisions somewhere else?
Well,
when,
that's the
when
big
you when,
question.
yeah, it's
That's the big question. Will a self-driving car be safer than a human-driven car? And it's not even a yes or no question. It's as the technology improves,
yeah.
will self-driving technology get better than the human-driven cars?
The possibility of predictability and communications among cars might be pretty awesome too. Sometimes you're in that situation, you're trying to predict what somebody else is going to do, and maybe you could have a situation where I mean, the self-driving car is always going to use its turn signal. That's what or it might even say, "Hey, I'm stopping," or that way all the other cars, every car is going to know what every other car is doing.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So
If they're all self-driving cars, but in
yeah,
that instance, they would all have to be self-driving vehicles. Sorry
yeah.
about acting distracted. My cat has decided to make an appearance. In fact, here
Oh,
she
that's lovely. Yes, I did notice.
is, just under the camera.
I don't know if we'll have a situation in which everybody's self-driving cars, but yeah. So whether or not it'll be something,
Yeah,
and I
in order for it to work, it has to be a car that can operate with vehicles that are not on its network.
and I also think you need to have some type of immediate manual override, no matter what. A situation where I could say, I'm overriding you. I have to do this now,
Yeah.
and sometimes you end up in those situations where you might see something and want to stop, or you might see something and want to do something, and there are even times, when Google Maps is not always, yeah, Google Maps does help, but it's not always a helper. I was in a situation just a few weeks ago in Mexico City, and we and I happened to be on the wrong side with my Uber driver of the Mexico City Marathon. So we were driving down this boulevard heading south, and the marathoners were going north, and we could not turn left. And I don't think Google Maps knew what was happening. Google Maps, because you had this long, just this bunches of people for 10 minutes, hundreds, thousands, the Mexico City Marathon. I don't know how big the Mexico City Marathon is, but I'm assuming it's pretty big. It probably gets a lot of people from all over Mexico, but I could definitely see though that it was getting runners from all over the world. So, we eventually got to a place where we could actually get to a road that went under the road where the marathon was, because we had to go either over or under it. We couldn't go through it.
Yep, you don't want to run over marathon runners.
Yeah, and they're not going to. Yeah, they're not going to stop before you. And it was fairly early in the morning, and it's also a little more tense situation because we're on our way to the airport. It's like, I don't want to be late for this, but everything worked out. But it was just one of those funny stories, and also Mexico City, a lot of other cities in Latin America, there aren't a lot of places where you have an opportunity to go over or under. A lot more red lights, a lot more at level crossings.
But the question about Google Maps isn't, will it ever be perfect? The question is, will it save more time than it costs? And I think Google Maps is already saving more time than it costs. And as the technology continues to improve, hopefully it will save more and more time, and the costs will get lower and lower.
I hope so too. Yeah, I naturally wonder how it pays for itself. It is very interesting that you
sometimes we'll know when it gets here. We won't know right now.
Sometimes the biggest problem is and people don't realize it, but GPS is a major battery hog.
Yes, it is.
It really takes down your power.
Yeah, if you're going to use your phone for navigating, it's best to have a charger in your phone or in your car so that you can just keep it plugged in the whole time.
Well, especially so when I'm traveling and I'm out, and usually I'm not driving much, but I'm walking, and I might be out all day, and I'm pretty much okay because I've got a car charger, but not when don't have any place, and nowadays a cell phone, unfortunately, you can't, it's hard to go a whole day without charging your phone. I can remember, I could go 2 whole days and not ever have to charge the phone. But nowadays you almost have to take a break in the middle of the day just to charge the phone.
Yeah, I have a portable battery to take care of that problem. So that
yes, I have portable batteries too.
Yeah, you got to use the portable batteries. So not only do you have a phone, but now you have to have a portable battery and a charger to connect the two with you at all times.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, most of the time the portable batteries use the different kind of cable. I don't know why, but they just want to, yeah, and of course it's not that fun to carry them around because they're kind of heavy. I've got this beautiful portable battery also that actually does have a real plug on it. So you can plug a laptop or something into it, although it doesn't give you that much juice, but it's definitely a good little battery pack, and it's just small enough that you can take it on a plane with you. So any other, sometimes I do worry that AI is already being used for some nefarious purposes. It's definitely being used for censorship. It's definitely being used
by scammers. You can use bots to go trolling online to find people who are vulnerable and susceptible to financial scams.
Yes.
It's being used for a lot of nefarious purposes. It's a tool. Like
you can have a lot of bots online too, also, just for lots of different things. Sometimes you wonder, am I talking to a person or am I talking to a bot? I haven't come up with very good test questions for things like that. It seems like there ought to be a question you could ask that would kind of stump it and say, yes, this is. I have to tell you, even though sometimes I've asked, on the phone, I said, are you a person or are you a machine? because sometimes, especially these people on the phone, they just get so robotic.
It can,
They
it
always
can,
ask
yes.
these questions.
That's one thing that I'm hoping for, is that AI gets to the point where the customer service agent is a robot and you can't tell and you don't care, because the AI customer service agent is better than the human and is more polite
Yeah.
and more knowledgeable. We're not there
Y-
yet, though.
Ed, you know what I think I've definitely had this happen more than once. Somebody will say something like, "Are you 21 to 30, 31 to 40, 41 to 50, 51 to 60?" And they'll like read off this as multiple choice. And I'll say, okay, I might say, "Oh, I'm 53." And they'll say, "So did you mean, so you mean 51 to 60?" And I'm like, how do you not know this? I mean, it's like,
How
oh,
do you buy cereal at the store?
yeah. I've had that's happened to me more than once, where they're asking me, and they have this form, that has these, it doesn't list the exact age, but they'll have these age brackets, and they can't figure out what age, where which bracket my age goes into. I'm like, oh my god, yeah,
It's very frustrating.
yeah, it's frustrating because I just ask myself, what that this person has any. I guess it's kind of scary in a way, because it just
Oh,
seems.
imagine being that person. That would be difficult. I mean, hopefully they're required to ask that particular follow-up question. Hopefully they've been trained and told that if they say 53, you have to say, so do you mean 51 to 60?
Yeah,
Because I
but
can
if
certainly
somebody,
see some soulless corporations requiring the uh, the question asker to go down that path.
yeah, I guess they want to make sure it ends up correct. It's rather strange though, but yeah,
People are really good at making mistakes. You want to break
you
something,
know,
give it to a person.
in some ways, you've made me more sympathetic if you really are working that hard to mistake proof your work. And I think mistake proofing your work is an important thing to do. You definitely figure out ways, to, you know, you, you check your multiplication, or you check your addition, or you check your numbers to make things right. And there are learn certain little tricks, that will check without having to redo the whole thing. It's,
It's hard,
how do
and
you,
that's where AI may be very useful for us, simply by double checking all of our work. If I had an AI companion on my phone and it was just with me listening all the time, it I can't imagine how much money and time I would save if it could just say, "Hey, Edward, what are you doing? You just did the exact opposite of what you said you were going to do." Just having it there to double check my work and make sure that I'm not undermining my own activities.
yes.
That would save me so much time, money, and aggravation. I would be a much more pleasant person if I had somebody there checking my work in real time all the time.
Yes, it would be.
Oh, there's one other thing about AI that I wanted to talk about, that I didn't know I wanted to talk about it until just now. I want a real-time AI fact checker in politics. Imagine a debate where one of the moderators is an AI and it's completely neutral, and the two candidates make their statements and they're allowed to make their statements, and the AI comes out and says, okay, candidate A was lying about this, this, and this. Here's the truth. They're mistaken here, but it's honest. And candidate B is lying about these things and they're honestly mistaken about these things. Real time AI fact checking for political debates. I would really, really like to see that.
I could tell you another story. I had a job interview with this company once that was I think they were like a database of court statements. And so, for example, imagine, for example, a tobacco company, and their representative goes into one court case and says this, and then 6 months later he goes into another court case and says something the exact opposite. And that was what this company did. They actually kept this database of court statement. Can you imagine something like that coming out into the court immediately? Said, well, you were in this court 6 months ago, and you said this.
You're right. I hadn't even thought about that yet. But
Yeah,
imagine every lawyer having a tablet in front
yeah,
of them that has the sum total of all legal precedent right there, and
yeah.
opposing counsel's own arguments. And oh wow, yes, that's going to be amazing as soon as that happens.
Not even necessarily court precedents, but just literally like like some scientific expert goes and makes a statement in court one day, and then well, 6 months ago you said tobacco was safe, and then now you're saying tobacco is dangerous. It's what
Which is
changed?
undermine their credibility. Yeah, that's going to be an extremely
Yeah, that
useful
was the whole point.
tool.
And this was years ago that I interviewed with this company. I can't remember that much about them. Just thought I remember the interview. I said, "Oh, this is really cool. What you're doing here." It's uh,
Machine learning is going to shred the red tape in our legal system eventually, if it keeps improving. Oh wow, yes, because if nothing else, our court system is ideally designed for AI to train on, because everything in law has to follow very exact, precise rules. There's very little subjectivity, and that's perfect for machine learning.
yes, it is.
Much better than driving. Maybe we'll have an AI lawyer before we have a really good self-driving car.
Oh boy, well they'll be upset about that, won't they? The bad effect though is we might end up with even more lawyers, and we already have a lot more than we need. I hope it doesn't mean more
Yes, we
silly
might.
lawsuits.
We might end up with more lawyers.
Speaking of silly lawsuits, I recently learned about that case where somebody drove a car, a drunk driver. This was on Twitter. Drunk driver drives a car, ends up going into the tail end of an 18 wheeler and goes under. The driver and the passenger are apparently killed. And they sued the trailer company because the guard should have been able to stop a car going that fast.
Yes,
You
the
caused
Mansfield car is supposed to
That
stop
is
that from happening.
absolutely positively absurd. You caused the accident, and now you're going to blame the trailer company for it because you caused the accident. And naturally, they're bringing up the fact, well, some of these newer ones are all built to stop a car at 30 miles per hour from going underneath, but some of the older ones aren't. I'm thinking, not to mention, I was thinking about this. A motor vehicle doesn't last that long, but just a trailer that doesn't have an engine or anything and just has the axles and the wheels, it's actually a very simple device. I would think you could probably keep a trailer going for 30 or 40 years. It's going to rust and whatever, but
Yeah, I mean, who is responsible for an accident? Who is responsible for the problem? It's an extremely old question, and getting AI involved is probably just going to make it even more complicated. My favorite example of this is actually almost 2,000 years old. There was a law case in the Roman Empire where a cow ran up 3 flights of stairs, fell off, went through the roof of a bar, and spilled the wine in the bar, like the big cask of wine. And the question was, who's responsible? Is the bar responsible? Is the apartment owner responsible? Is the tenant responsible? Is the owner of the cow responsible? And the list just keeps getting bigger and bigger the longer you look into it. So we've been having these legal problems about liability for thousands of years. They're not going anywhere.
you didn't know. So what happened in that case?
I don't know about the resolution in that case. I don't know. We don't.
Okay.
I haven't dug deeply enough into it to find it. It was just an absurd case where if you are one of the parties involved, you can totally sympathize with every individual down the chain
Yeah.
of custody.
I don't know if you've paid attention much to Tucker Carlson lately, but did you see that Martyr Made discussion where, or Daryl Cooper is his real name? Do you know where he really went out and attacked Churchill? Churchill got to become a big topic lately. I
I've
have my
only heard little
opinions.
bits on the side. I haven't watched any videos or interviews about the
Oh,
Churchill thing.
I definitely, I think the most evil thing that Britain did in either war was after Germany sued for peace on, and the armistice was declared on November 11th, 1918. Britain, in spite of, being at peace, still maintained this starvation blockade on Germany and through up until July of 1919.
Yes, they killed tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Germans unnecessarily with that blockade. That was
And
really
I, and I
horrible.
think that, possibly more than anything is what made the Germans so mad. And they said, we cannot trust these Brits.
Yeah, yeah,
I,
there were a lot of mistakes made on every side. And when you have a drunk in charge of a lot of politics, you're going to have suboptimal outcomes. So I can completely sympathize with people who criticize Churchill. I think it's a question of who was more incompetent. It's not a yes or no
yeah,
question. Oh, Churchill was the real villain. Hitler was the real villain. It's like no, 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 no. You got a lot of room for villainy on every side whenever there's a war.
I think, yeah, I don't know what Churchill's official role would have been in that blockade, but I mean, he was definitely involved with the government, but he wasn't prime minister at the time. Uh, and another thing apparently too, where Martyr made, he never also. I guess it was around the time of the fall of the Low Countries that Chamberlain did finally step down. So anything that happened in the war up until that, you have to put on Chamberlain, not on Churchill. Chamberlain was the prime minister when Hitler invaded Poland, and I guess he was the prime minister also when Hitler attacked, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France. But so I think, but there were,
And it's much easier to criticize in hindsight.
yeah. Well, you just have to know, who was in charge and what the dates are. And I think it's important to at least be
This is
accurate.
a competent AI will be very useful in this
Yes.
conversation.
You,
Who
you know,
was
I,
the worst villain in World War II?
Accuracy like this can be very important, especially when you're talking about something in war, though, when so many things happen at once, although it's also very easy to make a mistake, so uh, I think World War II was a complete disaster for America in so many ways, in spite of a victory. It's, uh, on the domestic
War
front,
usually is.
what?
War usually is for the victors and
Yeah.
the vanquished. It's usually a disaster for both sides.
On the domestic front, I can look at employer-based health insurance, income tax withholding. Uh, it also was the first thing that really created the teenage culture that didn't exist before that. Teenage shopping and all that stuff. Uh, Definitely, certainly, I think it probably corrupted our industry more. Industry is now getting married with the government. I also read one article that in U.S. News and World Report that said that World War II actually created more lasting bureaucracies than the New Deal.
Yeah, I could buy that.
Bureaucracies that did not go away for whatever reason. I remember George Will's book, talked about how they decided to start subsidizing honey and beeswax. And he said, yeah. And he said 40 years later, that honey subsidy is still going. It started
Well, the
during the
income
war.
tax was supposed to only affect the top 1%
Yeah.
for the duration of World War I.
Yep. And yeah. So on the domestic front, yeah, and also the GI Bill, I think it also led to an increase in college attendance, which I don't think has been a positive thing. So that was after the war, but they said, well, we got all these soldiers going back into the real world now. We don't want them to flood the economy, so we'll give them cheap college, and that was the first time there was a big government program to subsidize college, and it's really opened the floodgates on that ever since. So yeah, I think it was a very much a disaster, and a lot of people are asking questions now because they realize Western civilization is in a horribly wrong place, and they're wondering, how did we get there? How do we get back to the right place? I think, yeah,
There's the solution is in the question right there. How do we get back to the right
yeah,
place? When have we ever been in the right place?
true,
We've never been in the right place. The problem is we evolved to run around on the plains, stabbing
yes,
things with sticks and throwing rocks at them. And somebody got this crazy idea to build permanent settlements and put us in. And ever since then, we have been trying to figure out how to get extremely violent hunters
okay,
to live together in harmony. It's just not
maybe.
it's not very good for us.
Maybe the right place isn't the best word to use that, but I mean, I think people at one time, I think a lot of Americans sense that America and Western civilization is going in the wrong direction. How do we fix, where we're going, and how do we get here, and how do we get out of this? I mean, I certainly think that you should be allowed to question heroes. Uh, I've always, to a certain, I was asking questions like this when I was a teenager, of course. Uh, and although I didn't talk politics with my parents, my grandparents very much, I had two grandparents who thought that FDR was God, and I had two grandparents who thought FDR was Satan. So, in fact, my one grandmother who uh, was
Were they separate couples? Did one couple hate him and one couple love him?
one couple hated him, one couple loved him. Yes,
Okay,
uh,
that's better for family. That's better for
dad's
family.
parents loved FDR, and mother's parents hated FDR.
Mm.
Mother, my maternal grandmother, I mean, she was kind of in a vegetative state, but the last time she ever reacted to me saying anything was when I said Roosevelt. Uh, it was,
That's
and
unfortunate.
she just looked up and like, yeah, you could tell that
Did not
hit
like
emotions
Roosevelt
for
at
her.
all.
Uh, Grandma also got flowers from Arch Moore at her funeral, former West Virginia governor. So I will always acknowledge that one of the and a red governor at a time when West Virginia used to be solid blue. But he was from our area, so that was one thing. That was one thing nice growing up in a small state. It was actually possible, to know people who knew the governor.
Yes.
Anyway, so and it does help that once you get past that era where you no longer have people who were alive at the time, you can kind of get better debate about it, because now you no longer have these people who just debate on their emotions.
The clarity of hindsight removes a
It,
lot of emotion.
it seems like we're even quicker getting, I think, more clarity on September 11th now.
Hmm.
Although it's only been 23 years, there's
Still,
the
it's
sheepish
far enough
reaction.
away to where there are people debating it who don't have an emotional dog in the fight.
I think there were people who were always debating it. I mean,
Well, there are people who still debate Pearl Harbor.
that was one thing I once said to my aunt, who was born in 1929, that the suggested the possibility that the World Trade Center was an inside job, and there was just this. There was just this. Oh my gosh! I can't believe you think that, because I think there was actually just, for better or for worse, I think there was just a lot more trust back then. Maybe America was just more innocent.
I remember
Yeah.
the 90s. I don't remember innocent.
Well, yes, but I'm talking about my grandmother or my aunt who was born in 1929.
My grandmother was born in 1927 and she didn't trust government. She didn't. have any trust in
Yeah.
that. And my other grandmother was a school teacher and a stenographer, and she was married to a Marine who was a veteran of World War II. Yes, there was more trust. The further back in time you go, the more trust in government there is. And that, I think, is a function of the limited flow of information. 100 years ago, it was much harder to share information. It was expensive. And so less information gets out, and the information that gets out is more sanitized. And that lends to more trust. Today,
Yeah.
information is free, free and at light speed. So trust is at an all-time low. And I think that's a good thing.
Well, the other thing too, though, is you also had. I mean, I would certainly rather, I had one guy on here, who talks about how if a woman is in a restaurant in Singapore, she might leave her purse at the table and go to the restroom for 15 minutes. And she said people are just that way in Singapore because they just don't think about anybody stealing their stuff. And I knew another guy from Brazil. He would write his name on everything, and
Oh,
he
you can do
would.
that in Japan.
Yeah, yeah, I believe it about Japan. He would write his name on everything, and he would lock everything. It's I do kind of miss that world, where certainly where the churches were always left unlocked. It's interesting. I can go to Peru, which has certainly got more of a crime issue than America in some places, but they leave the churches unlocked there. It's kind of wild.
My favorite story is a man in Tokyo left his cell phone on a bench in one of the busiest parks. He forgot it. He came back after work and it was still there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just high trust societies tend to be more productive,
Oh,
and
yes.
they are also much more susceptible to authoritarianism. High trust
True.
societies tend to be a lot more authoritarian. So you get that trade
Yeah.
off.
Yeah. And I've heard, about Tbilisi. If you leave your laptop in a cab, the cab driver will come looking for you.
Yeah.
Uh, Yeah, the only thing, what I will admit though, what I would probably do if I found a cell phone in a park bench, I would probably take a look at it and say, okay, what cell phone is this? And if I said, okay, this is a Verizon phone, and I would go to the Verizon store and said, hey, I found somebody's cell phone. Can you figure out who this is and get it back to them? Figuring
hmm
they might figuring they might check the Verizon store for their cell phone.
Yes.
I
And
mean, that's
Verizon,
what I would do.
Verizon can just call them, can just send them an email and say, "Hey, we've got your phone. Somebody
Yeah.
turned it in here." Yep.
One time I was, I was standing, I don't know what I was doing, but I was standing by the street and I saw this fire truck go by and I saw a pair of gloves fall off of it. I had an appointment to go to, but later after I found my appointment, I looked at, where the fire truck had come from. Then I went down and said, so about a quarter mile away, I found this fire station. I went down and say, hey, I found your gloves. I said, thank you. And of course, being an Austin taxpayer, that would have just cost the taxpayers anyway. So,
It's
and,
just a
as,
nice
and as
thing
you
to
can
do, and
imagine,
we feel good
firemen's
when it's
gloves are not cheap either. I found that out.
oh no, no, they're expensive.
Yeah,
Fireproof gloves? Oh
yeah,
yes. People do want to do nice things for each other. It's just we're not we didn't evolve to have 5 million of us in one locality. We evolved to have a few hundred in one locality. And the more people you put in, the harder it is to get along, the more chaotic it gets.
it can be. I mean, I do think that this is something that's I've noticed. What changes in society have you noticed since the mass hysteria of early 2020? What has not went back to the way it was since
Trust
then?
in government.
Ed, the thing that I look at most is just this overall decline in customer service. It's like nobody cares anymore.
I can see that. I don't experience it so much because mostly I just encounter store clerks,
Yeah,
and I am insufferably happy and smiling all the time.
Okay.
And store clerks like that because when a store clerk sees me, they know I'm not going to yell at them, and at worst, I'm going to chat at them a little bit. So most store clerks are very happy to see me, and they tend to treat me well as a result.
I
I
I
don't
think,
really deal with customer service much other
well,
than
the first thing I have noticed, maybe it's because I travel some, is as I've noticed that the businesses that basically gave you Class A service or Grade A service, they still basically give you A service. But the businesses that gave you C service or didn't really care all that much, they went completely off a cliff and they went down to F.
yeah,
Uh,
I have zero trust for businesses that I don't patronize on a
and
regular
I
basis.
mean,
Zero trust.
I'm talking a lot about restaurants and stuff like that, where and and also too, and you've probably noticed this too. Are those stores that you go to, are they open the same hours as they were 5 years ago? I
No,
bet they are.
the hours are shorter. The hours are shorter. In Utah, we have a good number of 24-hour supermarkets and stores. Those have cut way back. That's
Yeah,
not a big issue to me. I tend to go to bed early and get up early, so I don't mind when the store closes at 10 or 11. It has been inconvenient when there's been the occasional emergency when a child has gotten hurt and you need to get some band-aids or something. That has been a problem. But yeah, hours have gone back. Inflation has hurt us in a lot of ways.
oh
We've
yeah,
cut back on customer service. I mean, when the pressure goes up, you cut where you can.
yeah. Well, I've no some of the 24-hour restaurants aren't 24 hours anymore. And they say it's often because they can't get people to work. I did notice that some of the stores also. I remember there was one or two FedExes that was always open, and now they're not open. You can't really, uh, and that's a major inconvenience when, especially since they're not even open on Sundays at all anymore. Yeah, that's there's a lot of things that maybe you just don't deal
Yeah,
with
I think it's a result
businesses as
of the
much as I do.
inflation. I think it's a
What?
result of inflation. I think that's
Yeah,
a consequence of inflation.
maybe inflation is a
And
factor. Yeah.
well, there are a lot of complicated things going on. People are a lot more afraid, so they're less willing to go out. They're less willing to work, and when they do work, they're less likely to be pleasant about it.
Yeah, I've never, I really, if I'm doing business with somebody, I really don't care how much they smile. That does, I just care that they do the job. You
Hmm.
know, I know, I look at it. Maybe you're just having a bad day. It's fine. I don't care. Just do the job. I'd rather have you. I would rather have you frown and get my hamburger order correctly than smile and mess it up.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, the restaurants don't impact me too much because I'm pushing to cook more of my own food just for health reasons,
yeah.
and I eat less than I've been eating, so I don't really go to too many restaurants anymore. The food just isn't appetizing to me.
Well, there's also the social aspect too.
Yes.
You go out and you meet people at restaurants. You go out and you go to meetups at restaurants or coffee shops. It's for me that's part of it. And I tell
Oh
people,
yeah, yeah.
I
I've
mean
done that in the past.
I understand. I certainly understand where you're coming from. You
I
know,
only go to restaurants when my goddaughter does something worthy of taking her out, and
you
she
know,
has her places that she likes.
I almost wish we'd held this up for a little later, but I'm probably going to go see that Matt Walsh movie this weekend. Have you heard about that? The
I have heard
Am I
about it, but I
Racist?
know nothing about it. I've just heard that he's come out with a new movie.
I don't always agree with Matt Walsh, but when Matt Walsh is good, he's very good. Although sometimes when he's bad, he's very bad. But that's a lot of people too. But
That's
and I
me.
think he realized, he often says, I kind of want to be the Michael Moore of the right. And I said, Matt, that's kind of what you have to do. It's apparently been described as kind of like a Borat uh, expose. And I said, oh, this ought to be good. I'm not a big fan of what Borat did, but I can understand why. But I can understand why some people would find it funny. He was literally just pranking everybody he talked to.
Yes,
But Borat
he's got
was
a
kind of
gift
warped,
for
though.
comedy.
I actually, I
He
actually
has
think,
a gift for comedy when he uses it to push an agenda.
yeah, I think Borat was so vulgar, though, and I remember the funniest thing in that movie, in my opinion, was the most G-rated moment in that movie, where he gets on the elevator with the hotel receptionist, and he thinks the elevator is the room, is his room. Yeah, that's a completely G-rated joke, and I thought it was the funniest moment in the movie. You wouldn't
Well,
care if
some
you
hotel rooms are very small.
but most cases I would never let a little kid watch that movie.
Yes.
But anyway, he was pranking all these people, so didn't realize they were going to be in his movie. But yeah, it should be interesting. I know apparently Robin DiAngelo is already, Ed, this is the thing about the left. Being a peaceful person and not wanting to believe in violence, I said, well, our most effective thing we can do is just ridicule and humiliate them. And this is what Matt Walsh is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because
That's why I prefer the disengagement.
Yeah, disengagement, maybe disengage, but this is something Wallace said. Well, disengagement can have the same effect, the effect of just crushing their self-esteem and destroying their spirits. And
Let's crush the
that's the
self-esteem
only
of
thing. That's the
politicians
only
by
thing you can do
ignoring
with
them.
the left is you just get them so they don't want to do this. Culturally, Ed, do you have any other predictions for the next 5 or 10 years in America? I mean, what do you think is going to happen here? Because you always look at the big picture.
Well, what I can't predict what's going to happen over the next 10 years. I know we're going to continue to build pressure until something snaps. And when it does snap, it's not going to be something like a civil war or a revolution or a famine or some big knockdown, drag out war in the Middle East or Taiwan or something. I think what's going to happen is we're going to get to a point where people are just going to get fed up with all of the static we're getting, and people are going to demand more transparency. I think the next 10 years are going to be an economic expansion unlike anything we've ever seen. We're going to see more poor people pull themselves into the middle class, and more people from the middle class pull themselves into the upper middle class. And I think we're going to see, I will hesitantly say, I think we're going to see an entertainment renaissance start within the next 5 years, where people are just going to stop caring about getting canceled or deplatformed, and they're just going to make stuff for their own little audiences. And some of those, and that's going to create a new Rocky and Bullwinkle style environment where people won't be afraid of making mistakes. And or no. What I think might actually happen is people will deliberately go out and try to make mistakes, big mistakes, and see what kind of reactions you get. Kind of like the Borat movie where he's going out punking people and pranking people and they don't know they're being recorded. It's just candid camera all over again was Borat. And I think we might get something similar to like that coming, where studios actually make movies hoping to be controversial just to get attention for that reason, and then make really big mistakes on purpose. I think we're going to see an entertainment renaissance. I think we're going to see a comedy renaissance. People are going to get richer, they're going to have more spending money, and people are going to learn how to use social media properly.
That should be very interesting. Social media properly. I don't know what's going to
Social
happen.
media is still very new. It's
Yes, it is.
2024. Social media kind of started in 2004, and even then, it wasn't until 2010 that people began to, that smartphones really began to penetrate the marketplace. And not even 2010, 2012, 2014 is when people got really big on having smartphones. Social media is still in its infancy. The next 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to see a lot of people really chill out.
Maybe they will. I think the biggest problem with social media, and especially with smartphones, it just there is so much noise on social media, and by noise, conversation that's not necessarily rude or mean, but just
It's
worthless.
irrelevant. It's
I
irrelevant.
once asked, every time I ask, and it's this is all stuff that didn't happen before social media because people just wouldn't say a word. It's like, for example, I've been wondering, about Springfield, Ohio. What's happening there with the apparently, a lot of Haitian immigrants have went there, and I don't really trust the media with regard to immigration at all. So I thought, I looked around. I said, who's in Springfield, Ohio? Maybe I'll have them come on this show. And there's always one person who chimes in. Well, I'm not in Springfield. I just know what's on the news. And it's like, okay, what's the point of you saying that? It doesn't help me find. I mean, you just had to talk because you felt like you were invited to talk, and it's just. And I didn't really say a word back to it, but I mean that's just noise. It's
Yep. There's a lot of noise out there.
and
It's
and it
totally
seems like to
irrelevant.
me, I think that's probably made us a little more tense because we just get tired of. We just don't want to deal with all the noise. And a part of me just wants to say, shut up. Because let's say let's say you're in the let's say you're in a school classroom, you know, a non-technical environment. You ask somebody, who, how many of you do so and so? You get people raising their hands. You don't get people. Nobody bothers to say, well, I don't do that. You get the yeses, but you don't hear from the no's. And sometimes you just get these unbelievably worthless suggestions. Like I was trying to find some information about one of Ron Paul's elections, and I get this immediate answer. Well, check Wikipedia. It's like, and I'm like, I already checked Wikipedia. It ain't there. I don't know if people will ever learn to moderate themselves, but it seems like and I do believe also that there are agitators on social media who go on social media just to agitate, and it might be one person running 50 different accounts.
Soon it will be an AI chatbot agitating,
Maybe so. Yeah, maybe so.
and everybody will have an AI filter that when they get on social media and they do their little typing and they hit enter, their AI decides whether or not to post it or not.
I mean, Facebook has become a completely worthless. Facebook is probably the most hated product that everybody uses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
There,
social media. Kids
there
kids
isn't
do
there
not
isn't
like
some,
social media
and
now.
it was one of those things that when we started using it, it was fun, and when we hadn't used something like this before, so we got into it, and I shouldn't say not everybody uses it, but almost everybody, and now we're just all using it because we've used it for so long, and we don't really know how to get off on anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody out there wants to replace Facebook, here's what they have to do. They have to figure out a way to get Facebook messages off of Facebook and into their platform. I think the fact that I have messaging history on Facebook with lots of people, I wouldn't know how to contact them any other way. I think that once you get that into a new platform, you have to make the transition easy and painless.
Yeah, Facebook is the Coca-Cola
Yeah.
of social media.
I mean, I mean, that's what I love about Odyssey and BitChute. I'm going to upload this video to YouTube, and usually it'll be faster, but in 12 hours, this will appear on BitChute and Odyssey. Ju- with and usually it's a lot faster. So I only have to upload once. So my transition onto those new platforms is easy.
Nice. That's good.
I have to go. I have to go into Rumble. I used to have to go into Rumble, but now I have to go into Rumble individually. And also to their credit, Odyssey will also backward synchronize. So if you've had your YouTube channel up for 3 years and you've already got a bunch of videos, and then you want to start using Odyssey, it won't happen overnight, but eventually Odyssey will pull all of those old videos off of YouTube as well. So you can you might have to email their tech support and ask for a little help, but they will do that for you. Odyssey is amazing, and not to mention also, I can change videos on Odyssey.
Fantastic.
It's the only place where I can do that. I mean, I can go on YouTube, Rumble, and BitChute. I can change the description of the video. I can change the title of the video. I can change all that. I can change the thumbnail, but I can't change the actual video. I have to delete the video and then upload it again. But no, Odyssey, I can do that. So I can make my edits. Yeah, it's awesome. I got on my tree stump for Odyssey, but I had to do that. And this is something I do wonder about, the whole immigrant thing. I will say, one of my former guests, Axel Kaiser, showed a video of Haitian immigrants apparently they were catching cats or eating cats in Chile. So he said, well, they do this in Chile. So, well, thank you, Axel. That confirms that it is being done. But, what do you make of this? I'm generally for open borders, but if 20,000 people are just suddenly showing up in a town of 50,000, that's not really just, what I would call spontaneous organic immigration. That's somebody who's organizing this, and they're purposely just trying to drop all these people into Springfield and they're trying to generate some kind of outcome other than just, helping these immigrants.
Yeah, it's a complicated question. I don't really know what's happening there.
Yeah, it's, kind of, and I don't know what you would do. I don't want more laws on immigrants, but it seems like to me you could charge somebody with a conspiracy or trafficking or something. I don't know. And, figuring out who's responsible for it, it's very wild. I didn't get to all the topics I wanted to talk about, but I thought this was a pretty good topic to bring up because I thought you might have an opinion. Are you seeing anything like that in Utah?
In the last 12 years, we've gotten a lot more immigrants into Utah. It certainly changed the flavor around here. A lot of the locals don't like even the Californians moving in. They liked the flavor that Utah had before Katrina. I think Katrina caused a lot of new people to move into the Salt Lake area. And
really, Hurricane Katrina?
Yes.
They went all the way to Salt Lake City.
All over the country. All over the country.
Well, they definitely went to Houston and Austin. I know that, but I didn't. That's the thing too. Ed, and maybe why I don't get as upset about immigrants from other countries. I said, yeah, well, look at what all these California people have done to my city. It's I used to go to this place and lunch was $8, and now it's $15. I mean, or real estate prices or whatever. And, and I think, real estate agents are just trying to make a living and make their money. But, I suspect real estate agents say, oh, California person, we can charge them 20% more, or something like that. I don't know if they're actually doing that.
Increase the demand, the price is going to go up.
Yeah.
And if somebody's sitting on 400,000 of equity, then yeah, they can afford a lot more house.
Well, and if you're in that kind of a business, your job is to try to maximize the price as much as you can. And realtors, that's how they make their money, because they make their commission. The higher the sale price, the more commission they get. So, I do wonder sometimes if this is just if this is eventually going to explode, because I think there was the cliche, that 60 years ago you graduated high school and you could go buy your own house. And now it seems as though home ownership is not really an option for a lot of people. And
Yeah, that cliche, like most cliches, is 100% wrong. There's more home ownership today than in the 1960s, and you couldn't graduate high school and go buy a home in 1960. That just wasn't a thing.
well, maybe but I can certainly hear, people having cheaper, the home, your mortgage payment might, be a certain number
Oh
of
yeah,
average. Yeah. Anyway, well, I think this is a good place to wrap up, Ed. It's always
when
good
you're
to have.
looking at aggregates, you don't get the whole picture.
But I also think there's a lot more regulations and stuff on housing that has made it harder to get houses. Uh, so
Oh yeah,
yeah, that's
zoning laws are horrible, and in some places they're really causing a lot of trouble.
zoning laws, building codes, yeah, lots of things. So anyway, yeah, I will. So please go to buymeacoffee.com to support my show. Check out my Substack. Check out my novel, Escape from the Village. Please like the video. Subscribe to the channel. Thank you, Ed Hoefer, for the fourth time. I'm Chris Baker. We're out.